The philosophical, Kwame Anthony Appiah, and anthropological, Franz Boas, critique of race, a construct of ideology, not biology. The concept of race has been critically examined across biological, philosophical, and anthropological disciplines, revealing it as a socio-political construct devoid of scientific legitimacy. This paper explores the foundations of racial categorization, its historical entanglement with social hierarchies, and its role in justifying slavery, colonization, and genocide. By examining the contributions of influential thinkers, such as Kwame Anthony Appiah, Francis Galton, Houston Stewart Chamberlain, and Franz Boas, we analyze the ideological roots of race, the political and social structures it supports, and the urgent need to dismantle this construct in pursuit of equality. Racial categorization emerged during European colonial expansion, when naturalists and philosophers sought to classify humanity into hierarchies. Early thinkers such as Carl Linnaeus, Systema Naturae, 1735, and Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, On the Natural Variety of Mankind, 1775, divided humans into discrete races based on superficial traits like skin color and skull shape. These classifications often included moral and intellectual attributes, with Europeans positioned as superior. The Enlightenment paradoxically entrenched racial thinking, with philosophers like Immanuel Kant asserting hierarchies of human worth based on racialized criteria. Kant's lectures on anthropology classified non-European groups as deficient in intellect and morality, reinforcing stereotypes used to justify colonialism and slavery. These ideas became the foundation for systemic social hierarchies that persisted for centuries. Race became a critical tool in legitimizing slavery and colonial exploitation. The transatlantic slave trade relied on the notion that Africans were inherently inferior and suited for servitude. Historian David Breon Davis highlights how racial ideologies were central to rationalizing the dehumanization and commodification of enslaved individuals. Davis, 1984. Similarly, colonial powers justified their dominance over indigenous populations through the rhetoric of racial superiority, portraying colonized peoples as uncivilized and incapable of self-governance. These ideologies had devastating consequences, from the extermination of indigenous populations in the Americas to the genocidal policies of Nazi Germany. Houston Stewart Chamberlain's Racial Theories in the Foundations of the 19th Century, 1899, promoted the idea of Aryan supremacy, directly influencing Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. This demonstrates the deadly implications of racial thinking as a tool for power and exclusion. Kwame Anthony Appiah, a Ghanaian British philosopher, has been a leading voice in dismantling the concept of race. In his seminal book In My Father's House, Africa in the Philosophy of Culture, 1992, Appiah argues that race is a fiction constructed to serve political and economic ends. He critiques both historical and contemporary uses of race, asserting that its persistence perpetuates divisions and inequalities. Appiah emphasizes the conceptual incoherence of race, stating, "There is nothing in the world that can do all we ask race to do for us." He argues that race conflates biology, culture, and identity in ways that are both inaccurate and harmful. For example, Appiah highlights how racial identities are socially constructed and vary significantly across cultures and historical contexts. This fluidity undermines the notion of fixed racial categories. Appiah further critiques anti-racism movements for inadvertently reinforcing the legitimacy of race. He contends that by focusing on combating racism within the framework of racial categories, these movements often fail to challenge the underlying concept of race itself. Appiah posits that eliminating the idea of race would render racism obsolete, as it would remove the foundation for discriminatory practices and ideologies. Eliminating the basis for racism, fighting racism without addressing the concept of race allows the structural foundations of inequality to persist. Race, as a construct, enables the categorization of people into hierarchical groups, creating the preconditions for prejudice and systemic discrimination. Preventing division, the idea of race divides humanity into arbitrary categories, fostering tribalism and conflict. By rejecting race, society can move toward recognizing common humanity rather than artificial distinctions. Promoting scientific integrity, the persistence of racial thinking undermines scientific progress, as it perpetuates outdated and disproven ideas about human biology. Rejecting race aligns with the overwhelming genetic evidence showing that human variation is clinal and does not align with racial categories. Lewontin, 1972. Dismantling structural inequality. Many societal institutions, from policing to healthcare, are structured around racial categories, perpetuating inequities. For instance, racial profiling and disparities in medical treatment often arise from implicit biases rooted in the belief in racial differences. Fostering global solidarity. Rejecting race challenges the nationalist and xenophobic ideologies that have historically used race as a justification for exclusion and violence. A world without race enables a more inclusive and cooperative global society. Franz Boas' empirical research laid the foundation for the anthropological rejection of race. In The Mind of Primitive Man, 1911, Boas dismantled the idea that physical traits, such as skull size, were linked to intellectual or moral capacities. He demonstrated that these traits were shaped by environmental factors rather than fixed biological differences. Boas also emphasized cultural relativism, rejecting the ethnocentric view that certain groups were superior. Boas' critique extended to the misuse of anthropology itself, as he sought to separate the discipline from its colonial origins. His legacy influenced generations of scholars, including Zora Neale Hurston and Ashley Montagu, who continued to challenge racial essentialism and advocate for cultural understanding. The concept of race is a socio-political construct that has been used to justify slavery, colonialism, and genocide while perpetuating systemic inequality. The works of Kwame Anthony Appiah, Franz Boas, and other critical thinkers reveal the artificiality and harmfulness of race as a category. Fighting racism requires dismantling the concept of race itself, as its elimination removes the foundation for prejudice and discrimination. While standing firm and fighting racism in all its different shapes is a daily struggle, a future without the concept of race itself should be the long-term goal and offers the possibility of a society built on shared humanity rather than artificial divisions. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you appreciate the video and keep updated on our upcoming content.